It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. 2 Evansville police supervisors turned themselves in this week to face charges of racketeering, fraud, and official misconduct. The 58 counts against Sergeant Bill Shirley and Lieutenant Stacy Shirley stem from the married couple allegedly collecting pay for extra hours they did not work. Joining me now is Houston Harwood of the Evansville Courier Press. He's the author of a detailed article about this case. Houston, as always, appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me, John.
Good to have you here. Well, in a nutshell, let's just start with what the Shirleys are accused of doing.
Yeah, so this case, a colleague went to their supervisor here earlier this year and raised some concerns about Bill and Stacy Shirley's off-duty work for the Evansville Housing Authority. And so in a nutshell, what this investigation found is that they, over a span of months, repeatedly logged that they had worked, full shifts and taken payments for work, but in fact, they had not showed up for these shifts.
And then we're talking about police shifts here, correct?
Yeah, working off-duty security at these Evansville Housing Authority apartment complexes.
Right. And so now, you mentioned the Evansville Housing Authority, also Dillard's department store, I understand, right?
Correct, yes. In the course of this investigation, they also found that Bill Shirley had worked off-duty security at Dillard's. At the Eastland Mall department store. And the investigation found that he would show up for his shift at Dillard's. His wife would be working her Evansville Police Department shift. Right. But that Bill Shirley, when he clocked in at Dillard's, he'd also clock his wife in, and then he'd clock her out. So she was getting paid by Dillard's even though she wasn't showing up for work.
I see. Now, their roles in these jobs was both security, is that right?
Yes. Working security, and this is pretty common. At the Evansville Police Department and other departments, officers can get some supplemental income working off duty as security, whether it be at bars where they might serve as a bouncer, or at stores, during Black Friday,
sure.
Tamping down on theft, or, in the Evansville Housing Authority case, providing security at these public housing complexes.
I see. Now, as I understand it, and maybe we can talk a little more about the investigation that led to the Shirleys essentially turning themselves in. I understand police use some modern technology to figure this out, right?
Yeah. So, to kind of give some context to the use of this technology in this investigation, Bill and Stacy Shirley were, longtime veterans of the Evansville Police Department. Stacy Shirley had worked there for 20 years. She was the supervisor of the EPD's juvenile unit at the time of her arrest, and her husband, Bill Shirley, he'd been there for 17 years. He was a motor patrol sergeant. He'd worked with the elite street crimes unit, formerly known as the Viper unit, which oversees, undercover officers targeting, narcotics and violent crime. He was a SWAT team member, and in 2019, a tri-state radio station named him Officer of the Year. So these were 2 pretty prominent, husband and wife officers. And so one thing that Phil Smith said,
and that's the police chief.
That's the police chief. Yep. He said, when an accusation is made against 2 prominent officers, we take that very seriously, and we want to have our ducks in a row when we do this investigation, so that there's no doubt as to what we found. And so, as part of that, they used, some technology to really suss out the allegation that they were, taking home pay for work they hadn't done, and that included extracting the contents of their cell phones, reviewing upwards of 450,000 text messages, 60,000 photos, and cell phone photos and videos now often include a GPS stamp embedded in that photo. So they looked at where were Bill and Stacy Shirley as it related to when they said that they were at these apartment complexes working their shifts. They also used the city's license plate reading camera system, the flock cameras, to track where the Shirleys' personal vehicles were around the times of these scheduled shifts. And then their take-home patrol vehicles also have GPS trackers installed in them. Bill Shirley's had a GPS tracker in it, the whole time, going back years, so they could see where that patrol car had gone. Phil Smith told me that Stacy Shirley had, an undercover type detective's vehicle from the EPD that didn't have the built-in GPS tracking unit. So when they started this investigation, they actually surreptitiously installed a GPS tracker on her patrol vehicle. Didn't tell her, and then they could, track her movements over the next month or so.
Wow. We're speaking with Houston Harwood of the Evansville Courier and Press. He's the author of a detailed article on this case, the case of Sergeant Bill Shirley and Lieutenant Stacy Shirley of the Evansville Police Department. They're both charged with 58 counts of racketeering, fraud, and official misconduct. Houston, of course, you can find this story at courierpress.com. All of Houston's stories are available there. Now, you mentioned the technology. Has the Shirley's attorney, Scott Danks, commented about the case?
Yes. So through their attorney, Scott Danks, they, first off turned themselves in when these charges were unveiled on Monday. Right. They turned themselves in, and then Scott Danks, handled them posting their bond. They were able to be released from jail on $500 bonds. And then the following day, they made their initial court appearance, and they pleaded not guilty to these charges. It's very important to note that.
Sure.
They pleaded not guilty, and Mr. Danks, in a statement to the Courier and Press, when we approached him, do you have a statement on behalf of your clients? He said, look, they maintain their innocence. They never set out to defraud anyone. There was no intentionality behind, how they logged their hours versus where they were working and when. And he said, without going into too much detail, said, look, this was a long-standing practice that they would file their time cards with, we worked for, just as an example, we worked Monday through Friday from this time to this time.
Right.
They'd file a standard time card, maybe even if, maybe that time was broken up a little bit more throughout the week. In their view, look, it all added up to the same thing. And so for the sake of simplicity, we filed these time cards. So that's kind of what they've put out publicly. The police department obviously has a much different view. Right.
The police department feels, as you mentioned earlier, that they've done a very thorough investigation and crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. You mentioned the Shirleys have worked for the EPD for many years. I'm sure Police Chief Phil Smith, you mentioned him, his reaction to this case. I'm sure he was surprised and disappointed.
Yeah, Phil Smith, he held a news conference Monday, the same day that a judge issued a warrant for the Shirleys' arrest. And, when he spoke to reporters about the case, he was pretty solemn, pretty, let's just say he wasn't a happy man having to discuss this situation. He called their actions, quote, beyond reprehensible. He said, quote, there are hundreds of good officers wearing the EPD uniform that are left picking up the pieces from this. And his point was that, when two officers, especially two senior officers, allegedly carry out a scheme like this, it hurts the public's trust in the rest of the police force. And he had a comment at one point, he praised the officer who came to their supervisor and raised these concerns about the Shirleys' off-duty work that sparked this investigation. He praised that officer, and he made a remark along the lines of, there's nobody who dislikes a corrupt cop more than a good cop.
Now, during this investigation, the Shirleys were placed on paid leave, but that's changed now, right?
Correct. Once this allegation was brought to Phil Smith earlier this year. He placed the Shirleys on paid leave while they conducted this investigation. Detectives interviewed the Shirleys in May, and when the Shirleys' answers to their questions weren't satisfactory, Phil Smith said he put them on unpaid leave, pursuant to now, this was a criminal case now that has resulted in charges. So they are on unpaid leave. Phil Smith has referred their employment, disciplinary stuff on the EPD side to the Police Merit Board. We just got Police Merit Board is going to meet next on June 23rd. Just today we got an agenda for that Police Merit Board meeting, but the Shirleys are not mentioned on that agenda yet. So it's a little unclear exactly when their disciplinary cases will go before the Merit Board, but they are on an unpaid leave right now. And Sergeant Anthony Ostiker, he's a spokesperson for the Evansville Police Department. He said that it's not uncommon for the Police Merit Board to wait and see how the criminal case plays out before taking a final action.
I see. Yeah, that would be pretty quick. I believe that's just next week that the Police Merit Commission will be meeting, and perhaps that is, as you say, too soon for them to take up the case. I'm talking. We'll do a little reset here. This is the Friday Wrap on WNIN. I'm John Gibson. My guest is Houston Harwood of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can find this story and more at courierpress.com. If the Police Merit Commission is apparently not going to take any action next week, what are the next steps in this case? That's a very high-profile case.
Yeah. So right now, the criminal case is going to play out. Scott Danks, their attorney, is going to get copies of basically all of the evidence that the investigation collected from the EPD side, and then what prosecutors have. So the Shirleys are going to get to review that evidence as part of the discovery process so that they can mount their defense. It's so they can take that. If they think they have a good case, then they could try to have a quick trial and make their case to a jury. If they look at the evidence and they look at the case and say, this is rolling the dice, they face, dozens of charges, then another option they'd have is to try and strike an agreement with prosecutors to dismiss some of those charges in exchange for guilty pleas. But this is still very early in the process, and so it's a little unclear where things are going to head for now. But, as of this week, the Shirleys and their attorneys say, we're pleading not guilty, and we deny these charges.
No date yet on the next court appearance, and I guess not a trial date yet, right?
I do believe that there is a next hearing. There's another date in the docket. I don't have it off the top of my head. Okay,
but probably a few weeks from now, I'm guessing, at least.
Correct. That's my understanding.
All right. Well, Houston, anything else to add about this case that we haven't touched on here?
I think. Just one important thing to note for people, the crux of what this investigation found, some of these text messages really shine a light on maybe why the Shirleys would have done something like this to experienced officers. That may be something that people are wondering. Why would you go out and do something like this that carries the risk of, derailing a storied career and resulting in a criminal case. Detectives said that they reviewed some text messages between the couple where they were discussing some financial hardships, and basically where in these text messages the Shirleys in conversations with each other were really linking these payments from the Evansville Housing Authority to ways to supplement their income as they're having these financial hurdles. In March 2024, Bill Shirley texted his wife and said, quote, "You think I like working all the time? I hate it, but we have expenses," in reference to these payments. In February 2023, Stacy Shirley wrote in a message to her husband that she was hoping to have a check coming soon from the Evansville Housing Authority because she was, quote, broke, tying that EHA payment to her finances. And, perhaps the most damning conversation that detectives reviewed as it relates to all of this. On January 7th, Stacy Shirley texted her husband basically lamenting that he had put fewer Evansville Housing Authority shifts in her schedule. And later in the conversation, Bill Shirley texted his wife and said, quote, "You're getting free money. I'm doing my best, dear." Stacy Shirley followed up with a "do better" to her husband. So, investigators really point to that exchange to say, look, you're getting free money. They knew what they were doing here. Yes. There's not an innocent explanation. And I'll close it out with this. Patrick McDonald, who is the lead detective on this case, he concluded their arrest affidavits by stating the investigation shows that Bill and Stacy worked together to knowingly and intentionally defraud EHA out of tens of thousands of dollars. They scheduled dates, completed fraudulent activity logs, completed fraudulent invoices, and then cashed the payroll checks, all while clearly having no intention of actually working the assigned shifts. So the EPD feels that they have their ducks in a row here.
They have some pretty strong evidence. Yes, indeed. Well, as always, Houston, we appreciate you coming in. That is Houston Harwood of the Evansville Courier and Press. You can find this story at courierpress.com, and all of Houston's stories from the last several years now it's getting to be. Houston, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you again for having me.
Appreciate you coming in. Well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, WNIN President and CEO Tim Black will join us. He'll have the latest on the federal funding situation in Washington, D.C. I hope you can join us, or stay with us, rather. I'm John Gibson. We'll be back in just a moment. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Good to have you along on this Friday. Well, joining me now is WNIN President and CEO Tim Black. Tim, as always, we appreciate the time.
Thanks, John.
All right, well, federal funding for public broadcasting stations like WNIN remains in doubt. Tim now is with us here to bring us the latest on these efforts to rescind money that was already approved by Congress for public broadcasting. Tim, what is the latest?
Well, thank you very much, John. And before I answer that question, I do want to say a big thank you to many of the folks who are listening to us right now. Since this whole situation got started some weeks ago, first of all, in our case, with Indiana state money being taken away, that money is actually gone now. And of course, now we're facing the question mark around federal funding. We have received lots of outreach from the community, words of support. We've received some very generous additional gifts and donations.
Wonderful.
All of that's fantastic, and we say a huge, huge thank you to everyone out there. We continue to need your support, though. And the most important thing right now, John, is that folks reach out to their senators, which is where the federal funding issue is right now.
It narrowly passed the House.
Very narrowly passed the House, and I realize in the end that doesn't make a difference, but that was somewhat surprising to some of the folks who watch these things pretty closely. 2 votes was the difference. At one time, we were actually up by 6 votes, and the way these things work, in government, particularly when you're in the majority, you get to do a lot of arm twisting and stopping clocks and that kind of stuff. So now we're in the Senate. The same process, for all intents and purposes, is ahead of us, in which there could just be a very simple up or down vote in the Senate. That would most likely be happening after the July 4th holiday. However, the latest is, unlike what happened in the House, this particular bill is going to be sent to the Appropriations Committee in the Senate before going to the full Senate.
Okay. And so what may or may not happen in that committee?
Well, there are lots of things that could happen. While we were just in that break, I mentioned to you, John, I've learned far more about the operations and ins and outs of government than I probably ever cared to know. But in the Appropriations Committee, it's probably about one of 3 options. The Appropriations Committee, first of all, is holding a hearing. They're going to be inviting the head of the Office of Management and Budget just to come and talk about what's in this bill so that they can do their due diligence. At that point, the bill can just get sent to the Senate for that straight up or down vote. The Appropriations Committee could decide that they want to make amendments to the legislation. If that were to happen, then that requires that all of this goes back to the House, and we start running up against this clock, which runs out on July 18th. This particular piece of legislation is required to be considered by both houses in Congress by the 18th of July, or it dies.
That's less than a month away now.
Exactly. Right. And the other possibility is that the Appropriations Committee could take a vote and simply decide that they're kicking the bill out completely and it'll never even go to the Senate for consideration. So these are all possibilities, John, but at this point, as I think we've all learned, I don't know that we can hang our hats on any of those.
Right. Well, you mentioned amendments. Any idea on what kind of amendments could be added to this measure?
Not really. I mean, there's lots of speculation. I think probably the biggest amendment, if you want to call it that might happen in this case, is that the Appropriations Committee could decide, for those who might not be familiar, this particular piece of legislation has 2 or 3 different funding possibilities in it for different parts of government.
Right, it's not just public
broadcasting.
It's
not just public broadcasting. And the Appropriations Committee could decide that they might completely remove the language for public broadcasting and not even allow that to be part of the bill. Once again, there are many, many things that could happen. And so no one knows for sure at this point.
Sure. So as I understand it, as you mentioned, the clock is running.
Yes.
We have till July 18th. If it does go straight to the Senate, what's the picture look like there? Doing the math, I would assume if all Democrats vote against rescinding the funding, you would need 4 Republicans to knock it down. Right?
You are correct in that, John, because that's just the way that it works. And of course, and I started to say everyone knows. I don't know that that's truly the case, but for those of you who did take civics in high school and learn that if there is a tie in the Senate, then the vice president gets to come in and cast the deciding vote. And I think we all know how that would go. The difference between the Senate and the House, I think primarily, John, is that most people feel we being public media, has several more friends in the Senate than might be lodged in the House. Most people immediately point to Senator Susan Collins from Maine, Senator Lisa Murkowski from the state of Alaska. There are others within the House who have expressed some concern, not necessarily because they're fans of public media. Our own senator here in the state of Indiana, Senator Todd Young, I was able to meet with an aide in his office a few weeks back. She expressed to me Senator Young's disdain for this growing trend, as she described it, of feeling as if they're constantly taking back promised money, which public media dollars in this case has been in this budget for quite some time.
Right.
So there are other people in the Senate who might be a little bit more friendly to our situation. So the math, yes, is not in our favor, but there might be a better chance of some of these folks coming over to our side of the fence.
We've probably talked about this before, but how much does WNIN depend on funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
In WNIN's case, between the dollars that we receive for both radio and television, it's just a little over $1 million in real money on an annual basis. That's about 30% of our budget. And once again, that doesn't count the 460-some thousand that we know we have lost from the state of Indiana.
From the state funding, yes, indeed. We've talked about this as well. Probably another opportunity here. What can listeners do?
Right now, John, the important thing for listeners to do is to contact their senator. And I will be very blunt here. I'm not often that way in these conversations. I will suggest that in the state of Indiana, you focus your attention on contacting Senator Young. Senator Banks has made it very clear that he has no intention of supporting public media and has stated that very clearly in many responses that others have received. If you happen to be listening to us in the state of Kentucky, I will encourage you to reach out to both Senator Rand Paul and Senator Mitch McConnell. Both of those senators have been friendly in the past, specifically to KET in Kentucky. And Senator McConnell sits on the Appropriations Committee and will be playing a somewhat additional role in this whole measure. And I think it's extremely important that those senators be contacted. If you're wanting to do something right now, that's the way to do it. Go to our website at WNIN.org. There's a link right at the top of the page that says contact your congressman or contact your senator. Click that, and it'll make it very, very simple for you.
You mentioned some recent generosity. Any message for listeners or viewers who have not donated?
Absolutely. We're a nonprofit. We certainly depend upon dollars that come to us in the community. Even with the loss of federal and state funding, we still receive over half of our funding from many of you who are listening to us, those who watch us on television. Certainly, if you'd like to make an additional gift, we're more than happy to accept that. Again, though, at this moment in time, the really important thing to do is to reach out to your senator and let them know why it is important that WNIN exists in this community.
Yes, indeed. Well, Tim, anything else to add that we haven't touched on here?
I don't really think so, John. I think we hit the key points. I do want to repeat again, as I've said before, WNIN is not closing its doors, but I don't think anybody has to do a lot of math to figure out that if we're looking at the very strong possibility of facing a deficit of over $1.5 million on an annual basis, that is not easy to make up. Right. And while we have the ability to deal with that in the short term, that is not a sustainable situation. And if that scares you, if you are concerned about this mission that we have in this community and the information and what we provide in this community, again, I strongly urge you to reach out to your senator, and we certainly would always be happy to take an additional gift.
That is WNIN President and CEO Tim Black. Tim, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
And, of course, we will be in touch. All right, well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, WNIN's Tim Jagielo will join us. We'll listen back to his feature about the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana celebrating 55 years. That's next on the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. The Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana is the regional arts partner for the Indiana Arts Commission, overseeing 10 counties. It operates a gallery space while promoting art activities. The Arts Council is celebrating 55 years, but there's also a little uncertainty about funding. WNIN's Tim Jagielo filed this report this week.
What do you guys think of this one?
I love it.
You love it?
An Evansville Children's Museum summer camp is visiting the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana. Executive Director Ann McKim is talking with campers about pieces in the current exhibit.
Kind of weird. So I always think like two things can be true. It can be really cool and really weird at the same time.
McKim says they love opening the gallery to children.
It's just incredibly important for mental development. There's social skills that kids get in galleries. There's connectivity. There's curiosity. All of these things that happen in a gallery, we're so eager to offer that to the community.
ArtsWin will soon celebrate 55 years of operating in the community. They are the regional arts partner for the Indiana Arts Commission, overseeing 10 counties from Posey to Perry and up to Knox County. The celebration is called The Big Picture, 55 Years of Arts in Evansville. McKim says art is part of the big picture of this community, and ArtsWin has been involved on several fronts, such as funding art projects for schools.
For years, whether it's music or buying equipment for classes, I can think of so many grants. But if your kid went through West Terrace and made a piece of pottery, that's because the Arts Council paid for a kiln out there. And that's at almost every school. There's a different thing that the Arts Council has funded as teachers have asked.
There's also the investment into public art such as murals and helping small art-related nonprofits get started. Here, Evansville band Macro Geo performs on the Artswin rooftop for the recent reception for the Art in the City exhibit.
There are so many talented musicians in this community, and being a space where people can come and hear music that's not necessarily in a bar setting is very nice. Over the years, the way that we've supported local musicians has looked different. In our previous facility, we had a brown bag concert series that was indoors. Where we are now, indoor concerts aren't quite as doable based on the setup, but the rooftop is a wonderful facility for local musicians.
Here, local band The Randys are heard from street level during that reception, their music bouncing off the buildings on Main Street. Artswin's first brick and mortar location was at the current Co-work Evansville space. They moved into 212 Main Street in 2019, following another successful capital campaign, making rooftop concerts and field trips for kids possible.
Hey guys, thank you for coming. I'm glad that you came and visited. And so, anytime you want to come to the art gallery, you can tell your mom and dad to bring you because we're always free and we're always open.
The Big Picture celebration is on June 25th at 5 p.m. Like many nonprofit organizations, there's some uncertainty in state and federal arts funding. McKim says Artswin is being careful about launching new initiatives or programs.
So I know that that we will always have a vibrant arts and cultural scene here, and we're just always evaluating ways to make sure that we can provide these services and provide this access, and how and where and with who.
For WNIN News, I'm Tim Jagielo.
And Tim joins us live here in the studio. As always, Tim, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, Director Ann McKim, she spoke of some uncertainty about state funding, something those of us in public media can relate to. Can you give us a little more detail on that?
Right, this is part of our ongoing series of funding uncertainty in the tri-state. Well, and actually, I have to preface this a lot because the question of this came about because I just wanted to end the interview with, tell me about the future of what Artswin has planned. And kind of she had trouble. She didn't have trouble answering it. She just didn't feel like she could for sure answer the question because there is some uncertainty, and she didn't want to underpromise or overpromise depending on what happened. And so basically, what's going on is that Artswin, like a lot of organizations, has a lot of different funding sources. One of their big chunks of money does come from the state, specifically the Indiana Arts Commission, and more specifically in two different areas. And the reason why we're talking about the state is because the Indiana Arts Commission, their budget was cut by 33% going forward. So their budget was $3.4 million as of April, I think was the last numbers that we saw. And so they have two sources of income from the IAC, and that's competitive grants. And so they apply for those. Again, they're competitive, so they get them most years, and it's around, and I say around, between $8,000 to $12,000 annually. They usually receive funds, but it can fluctuate. It's competitive, and so it's hard to tell how much that could be affected by a decreased, budget there. The other one is because they're a regional partner. There's a contract, and the contract for them is about $25,000 annually for their part as a regional partner.
I see.
And so do they know if that's going to be affected by this budget cut? They don't know. So she didn't want to overspeak and say, well, we're launching this cool new program and then have it not work out because funding does. Right now they're just watching and listening basically and seeing what happens. And so this reduction is linked to reduce federal funding to the state, like the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities.
Right. Again, lots of funding issues all the way around. Well, let's talk a little bit about Artswin and how they've helped organizations and artists over the years. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, there's lots to say, of course. One of the big things is that several years ago they became responsible for $300,000 in Arts Institute funding every year, annually, that they don't receive, but they funnel through and kind of decide where it goes. And so that's been going on for several years. I think I got more details if I talk about the timeline, but they do funnel a lot of money into projects, into programs, into events. She mentioned, the school equipment that has been funded. There's also the public art that is funded,
sure,
murals and things like that. She mentioned even like the marker that's outside of our door was an Arts Win project. She estimates that they invest about $1 million. They've invested about $1 million, through various means over the years, and also, they support startups for nonprofits, nonprofit art organizations. They coach different arts organizations around their region on programming and having events. They are an anchor of Main Street,
sure,
and and they've worked hard to kind of help repopulate. That's probably the wrong word to use, but they were part of repopulating downtown. I was not here to see downtown be rather empty, but I keep hearing about how it wasn't a place that you wanted to go.
Well, yeah, there were certainly periods where, basically a transitional period where retail left and it took a while for other types of businesses and organizations to pop up down here. But as you mentioned, though, the Arts Council has been around 55 years, a big celebration coming up. Any notes on that before we move on?
Well, I think Caitlin would be the one to ask about that.
That's true. Caitlin Bentley will be joining us here shortly from the Arts Council. That's great. Well, we should probably put a lid on this one for now. That is Tim Jagielo, his story on the Arts Council, and it's 55 years here in Evansville. You can catch that feature also online if you didn't catch it moments ago. As always, Tim, thank you so much for all your work. We appreciate that. Well, coming up on the Friday Wrap, Jevin Redman will join us for the Sports Chat. How about those Pacers? Well, we'll talk about that and more coming up on the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. It's the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. And joining me now is Jevin Redman with this week's Sports Chat. Good to have you along again, Jevin.
Yeah, thanks, John.
All right. Well, a lot of stuff going on. First of all, let's begin with high school baseball. We have not one, not two, but three teams from the area going for a state championship this weekend.
Yeah, very impressive showing for the Evansville tri-state area. Typically, you hope to get a team up there to compete for a championship, but three teams in the area playing this weekend up at Victory Field in Indianapolis, and this will be the final weekend of the high school sports season. But tonight, the Jasper Wildcats playing the Class 3A championship game at 7 o'clock Central Time. They're taking on Andrean. And then tomorrow, you have two Evansville schools playing for a state championship at 3:30 in Class 2A. Mater Dei will take on Boone Grove. And then tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, it's North against Valparaiso in the Class 4A title game. And, while we talk about three teams in the tri-state area, it's also three teams in the SIAC in the same conference. Right. So very impressive to have three teams involved, and best select local teams this weekend. Do want to touch on real quick, last weekend the softball season wrapped up with the state finals, and the Tecumseh Braves won another state championship. They beat Andrean in the Class 2A title game 2-0. That was at Purdue University, and for Tecumseh, it's their sixth state championship in program history, which is the second most all-time in the state of Indiana for softball, and they've won a state title 3 of the last 4 years.
Yeah, once again, lots of area teams doing some big things here. Well, speaking of impressive, let's move on to the Indiana Pacers, who have pushed the NBA Finals to a deciding seventh game, right?
Yeah, the Pacers won Game 6 at home last night, 108-91 against the Thunder, and really it wasn't that close. The Pacers led by 30 points after the third quarter. Most of these games have been pretty competitive, at least until the fourth quarter, but last night was an outlier, so the Pacers able to stave off elimination, and they forced the first Game 7 in the NBA Finals since 2016. That was between the Cavaliers and the Warriors. So the Pacers, for the first time in program history, are one win away, or franchise history, I should say, one win away from an NBA championship. Game 7 will be on Sunday at 7 o'clock in Oklahoma City, and it's really impressive because the Pacers really weren't expected to be in this situation, not only not in the finals, but also pushing this Thunder team that won 68 games regular season to a Game 7, so it should be fun to watch on Sunday.
Should be something, yes, indeed. Well, back to baseball here. The College World Series is about to wrap up, right?
Yeah, we're down to just two teams, so announce a best-of-3 series in the College World Series in Omaha. It'll be this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. It's between Coastal Carolina and LSU, and Coastal Carolina is just on an incredible run right now, John. They've won 26 straight games, which would be impressive no matter the sport, but baseball, so many things have to go your way to win that many straight games. But now it's whoever wins 2 of 3 between Coastal Carolina and LSU. And, of course, there was one, somewhat local team with Murray State that was in the College World Series. They had a Cinderella run, first time in program history. Right. They'd made the College World Series, but they lost both their games against UCLA 6-4 on Saturday, and then they got knocked out by Arkansas on Monday 3-0. But still, Murray State won 44 games this year and should be proud of their season.
Yes, indeed. Well, the Evansville Otters, I believe they just wrapped up a homestand, right?
They did, yeah. A 6-game homestand finished up yesterday, actually with a doubleheader. They lost against the Washington Wild Things 1-0 and 8-6. The Otters are 16-19 in the season, and now they start a 6-game road trip this weekend. It'll start at the Joliet Slammers this weekend. Then next week they'll be at the Gateway Grizzlies for a 3-game series. The Otters right now are 4.5 games out of first place as they sit in third place in their division with that 16-19 record.
Yes, indeed. And in the big leagues, you've got the Cardinals chasing the Cubs, right?
Yeah, the Cardinals are coming off a 3-game sweep with the White Sox. They won both games, a doubleheader yesterday up in Chicago. So the Cardinals now 40-35 in the season. They're 5.5 games back of the Cubs for first place, who are 45-29. Chicago is home against Seattle this weekend. The Cardinals will welcome the Reds this weekend for a 3-game series. But really, it's hard to believe already we're pretty much at the halfway point of the baseball season.
Almost.
81 games marks the midway point. The Cardinals have played 75, so you can kind of start to look at the standings now, and the Cardinals in the thick of things right now in terms of the division and also the wild card.
And now that summer officially arrives tonight, we can finally say that the hockey season, the ice hockey season, is over. The Stanley Cup stayed in Florida as the Panthers eliminated Edmonton this past week. Anything else to add, Jevin?
No, just, you mentioned the back-to-back championships for Florida Panthers in hockey. They're only the third team in the last 25 years that have won back-to-back titles, as Tampa Bay did it back in 20 and 21 and Pittsburgh in 2016 and 2017. So an impressive feat there with the Panthers winning back-to-back Stanley Cup championships.
Yes, indeed. That is Jevin Redman with the Sports Chat. As always, Jevin, thank you so much.
Yep, thanks, John.
All right, well, coming up on the Friday wrap, Caitlin Bentley will join us for the Weekend Notebook. Hope you can stay with us. It's the Friday wrap on WNIN FM. Good to have you along on this Friday. And joining me now live in the studio from the Arts Council of Southwestern Indiana, it's Caitlin Bentley. Caitlin, great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, a busy weekend here in the Tri-State. Let's start off with the Pride Music Night at Haney's Corner tonight, right?
Yes, there's going to be some music at the Wiffle Ball Field. It is a free and family-friendly show. It starts at 6 p.m. I think it goes until 9:30. And it's going to feature Lorelei, D.R. Bridges, and Pink Crayon, who I believe is from Louisville, at the corner of 2nd and Adams Street.
Yes, indeed. That's happening tonight, Pride Music Night. Also happening is the Hubstadt Summerfest. That festival continues through Saturday night at the old Hubstadt School grounds at the corner of West and Gibson Streets in Hubstadt. The event includes a parade at 1 p.m. Saturday. Then back down here in Evansville, we've got a show at the Victory Theater tonight, right?
We've got some country music at the Victory, a performer named Easton Corbin, and they'll have an opening act named Dylan Carmichael. It starts at 7 p.m. Tickets start at $32.
Yes, indeed. And that's Easton Corbin at the Victory Theater tonight. Also happening this evening, a summer solstice celebration at the Evansville Museum of Arts, History, and Science. They're calling it a free star party on the museum lawn. The Evansville Astronomical Society invites you to admire the sun's grand exit as it sets at 8:17 p.m., marking the official start of summer. You're encouraged to bring a lawn chair or blanket, sunglasses, sunscreen. It's all happening at the Evansville Museum of Arts, History, and Science, that summer solstice celebration. And Caitlin, we've got some live theater tonight, right?
Yes, Burnt Around the Edges at Stage 2. The play from Wendy Brown takes you into the lively, slightly chaotic world of the Madison family just before Christmas 2024. Performances are at 7:30 Friday and Saturday, and at 2 and 6 p.m. Sunday at Stage 2 on Congress Avenue. Tickets are $18 in advance and $20 at the door.
And a note, that play does contain adult language and situations, just to that you're clear on that. Well, let's move on to tomorrow, Saturday. We've got the Garden Walk. The Southwestern Indiana Master Gardeners Association is hosting what they call a Walk with Nature 2025. It's Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The event showcases a variety of gardens in Evansville and Newburgh. Master gardeners will be at each location. Tickets for the self-guided tour range from $20 to $25 and are available at the Master Gardeners website. Also happening tomorrow, Caitlin, it's the Franklin Street Bazaar, right?
Yes, the Franklin Street Bazaar is back after taking a week off last weekend. So this is a weekly event on the library grounds in the 2000 block of West Franklin Street, and it goes from 9 to 1. There's vendors, free yoga, live music, food trucks, and of course you can get some fresh produce over there. So
yes, indeed, lots of that. Well, also happening tomorrow, it's the EVPL's Speak series. This year's series will be concluding Saturday afternoon with Angela Jackson Brown. She's an award-winning author, poet, playwright, and associate professor of creative writing at Indiana University. Brown will speak at 2 p.m. at Central Library's Browning Room. Admission is free. And here's an event tomorrow night that I know you know a lot about, Caitlin.
Yes, our On the Roof concert series is back tomorrow night. Doors open at 6 and the concert starts at 6:30. We're going to have Lorelei, Woboy, and Stella at 212 Main Street. And it's going to be hot, so we'll have plenty of water, but dress cool.
Yes, dress cool and stay hydrated. Moving on to Sunday, Nate Bargatze, the comedy superstar, is bringing his Big Dumb Eyes tour to the Ford Center for 2 shows. Performances are at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Tickets start at $55. And quickly looking into next week, a big event for the Arts Council, right?
Yes, Wednesday, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. will be on the 200 block of Main Street. We'll be making art, t-shirt printing. Bring your own blank t-shirt, but we will have a few available for a small price. And we'll have cake by Urban Seeds with fresh ingredients, and then all sorts of other stuff. You can look at the gallery as well.
Wonderful. That is Caitlin Mitley from the Arts Council with this week's Weekend Notebook. I'd like to thank all of our guests today, Houston Harwood, also WNIN President and CEO Tim Black. Thanks to WNIN's Tim Jagielo. Thanks to Jevin Redman, not only for the sports chat, but for engineering today's show. Thanks to Mariah Winnie for social media support, Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, and listeners like you. This is 88.3 WNIN FM, Evansville, Henderson, and Owensboro. With your support, we're building a better tri-state together. And for this Friday, that's a wrap.